So I thought we should talk about the project or the assignment that all of you are expected to do, so that as you are listening and you're reading, you also have clarity on where we are going with it, right? Because there is an assessment towards the end of it, and I'm not looking at it so much as an assessment. It's working or when? Yeah, it's working now. So more than the question of assessment, the idea of doing this as a clinic, as a format of a clinic, is to say that, okay, can we talk about a issue, a particular they're going to contribute to, or we could talk about group projects or individual projects. And I'll tell you what I mean by these projects a little more, right? Now, the idea of a clinic, those of you who know about the clinical legal education and all would realize that the idea of a clinic is to provide students with an experience which is very close to the reality that that we are staying in, right? And everything that you learn here should be capable of bringing about some change in what you see around you. So the knowledge that is here needs to translate, and this needs to be done in a way that we're also helping you come to that conclusion. So as you deal with the problem, so if you have a problem in mind, to say that, okay, is this a dignity question and what is it that I can do about here? Because we're all very conscious of the fact that bringing about interventions is complex. It's not unidimensional. So you might think that what you're doing is in the best interest of that person, but it's very much possible that that person might not think of it as what's best for them. And that is a problem that as lawyers, it's something that you should grapple with, because one of the big problems that is associated with the legal profession is where the lawyer takes on the role of the client, and the client's interests are subsumed to the lawyer's interest. The lawyer needs to win the case, right? I need to make this point, or I need to win this case, or I think this is the best thing to do. And where does that leave people who are actually the persons whose rights are violated or who are asking for a remedy? And one of the big criticisms of the legal profession is this lack of, I would call it an ethical question among lawyers, or being conscious that you are an interlocutor, but you should not and cannot decide what the client would want to do. And this is not an easy question. Many a times lawyers think that they are acting in the best interest of their client. They know what needs to be done better than their clients can. So when we are asking you to be cautious about interventions, the question is, if you have a situation with you and you are saying, okay, it is best answered in this manner, are there questions which can arise here? And have you thought that through? So the reason we want to do it in a classroom setting is for you to be able to understand a particular issue from all of its various ramifications for the person who is asking for that relief. And a clinical class is asking you to think that through in a more controlled environment, because this is something that you will do as you graduate, something that you are expected to do as you graduate. And we believe that there hasn't been enough training on how lawyers deal with real life problems. So the idea of a clinic is to present you with a real life problem and ask you to come up with, okay, if this is a problem that you are faced with, from whatever you have heard in the context of how dignity can be made applicable here, how would you do it? Right? So we were thinking initially, there was a lot of discussion on how do we do it, and then we finally said, okay, we've been talking about participation. Surely people should be allowed to decide and choose about what is it that they want to do, and we don't decide what is best for you, right? So tomorrow morning in the tutorial, what we will be expecting all of you to do is think about which of the issues you heard so far. So we've also put up, this is what Professor Daly received from all of you. These are the various ideas of dignity that you have started with. So I'll give you some time to take a look at it. We're not trying to say who said what, but this is a collection of dignity issues. Please go through it carefully and see from what you've heard so far or in general, are there things which are not reflected there? What are the gaps that you're able to see? What is it that you see there? And where do you think the gaps are? So I'll give you 5 minutes to just
Can you read it?
go through it. Can you read it? Do you want me to read it out for you? Should I read it out? I'll read it out. So the first one says, dignity means treating human beings with respect. It's an acknowledgement of one's intrinsic worth as a human being. It need not be earned. In a legal context, it would mean having the right to be acknowledged as a human and be entitled to basic human rights. The second says being able to hold your head up in whatever room you walk into. It is born inside but can be taken away by the outside. The third is being treated with respect and honor, being treated equally, irrespective of sociological, psychological, or other aspects. The fourth is every person has an inherent right to dignity, which entitles them to respect and honor simply for being human. This fundamental right, rooted in the intrinsic worth and value of every individual, isn't earned, it's inherent. The fifth is saying dignity is a comfortable zone of, I think it's leading life. The sixth is being respected, which treatment comes automatically with the virtue of being human. 7, dignity is the most basic respect that a human deserves. 8 is dignity is the ability to do, act according to one's aspiration, provided it doesn't harm others around, without facing artificial or externally imposed hindrances, barriers, constraints. 9, dignity to me means living respectfully, living at par with the rest of the society, without any discrimination or any sort of unequal treatment or mistreatment. Can somebody just ask them to be quiet? Meted out due to any kind of social, economical, or political factors, simply to live with my basic rights. 10th, dignity is directly proportional to self-respect. The way you respect yourself decides and curates your idea of dignity, the dignity you want. Dignity means that an individual doesn't feel their self-respect harmed, like where one's self-respect is not challenged and one's self-worth is not eroded by events in one's life. Dignity is something which is inherent to an individual and every individual possesses it on account of them being a human being. It's not something which is granted by a state or government, but something inherently possessed. 12th, dignity is the inherent, inalienable, and fundamental worth of every individual, found almost everywhere, that fosters a profound and fulfilling sense of being. It is a bedrock of self-respect and the basis for all human sensibilities. 13, the inherent worth and respect deserved by every individual in all circumstances, reflected in their self-respect and honorable treatment by others. 14, every human being possesses inherent worth and deserves to be treated with respect and ethical considerations. Individuals are not objects or means to an end. So you will see about 14. So, do you think some ideas are clearly repeating? The idea of self-respect, the idea of something being inherent, something being intrinsic, and the idea of respect. But are there things that we have been talking about which are not figuring? So if you remember the 3 basket of rights that we were talking about yesterday, do you think all the 3 are being reflected here, or there are some which are not? Do you remember what these 3 baskets were from yesterday?
And we're about living with dignity.
Yeah, she's got that.
Okay.
Is it dignity and
Right. So do you think all 3 of them are coming here?
full development of one's personality is missing in most of
In most of them, right? So what do you think fall within the full development of one's personality? What kind of rights are we talking about there?
we could potentially be talking about socio-economic rights or even political rights that matter, because if you want to ensure a person's self-development, then you also need to give them the conditions to flourish and, really have the conditions in which they can grow themselves without any sort of hindrances. So, let's say the right to education would be something which would allow someone to pursue their self-development.
So in this list, do you think anything is talking about that? Yeah.
One word which I don't find is the word free.
The word free? Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, freedom isn't there. No? It's all about intrinsic worth. It's all about respect.
Quality.
And equality is there, right? No?
Quality is there.
Equality is there. Where is it?
Third point.
Yeah, third one, being treated equally. It's really amazing. Yeah, freedom isn't there, which is something I thought should have been on everybody's mind. Okay. But in terms of socio-economic rights, what do you think? Which of these is coming closest to that?
Fifth one.
The fifth one? Dignity is a source of, the idea of comfort is the idea of dignity, of having, your basic amenities, your basic needs, which are being met, and that could possibly.
Comfort can, like the standard of comfort will also be defined by external sources. Like what is comfort? One who is basically like with basic education, with basic work, with basic source of income, so basic parameters which are decided by external factors.
Yeah. So the idea of social security has always been something associated with dignity in a given society. So social security can't mean, okay, across the world, everybody gets only like 2 kgs of rice and then we're done with social security. It is always a question of, in that society, what would the basic needs which are required to allow that person to live with comfort and hence with respect. So the linkages of comfort with respect, self-respect as well as being respected by others. The foundation is in terms of a certain level of comfort. So it's also interesting that we're not talking about basic needs, because usually when we say socioeconomic rights, we say needs, right? And it's always tricky about how exactly are you going to define a need. So it's very interesting that we talk about comfort and not only about a need, right? Because comfort in that sense makes it more than, okay, the way in which our state goes around defining a minimum wage as 40 rupees a day and expecting everybody to live a life of dignity in 40 rupees is where, the basic needs and the idea of comfort can become a little more broader than that. Okay. So, since we are going to pitch the ideas tomorrow, what we had in mind is that those of you at the conference know that NALSA has at least 2 clinical projects which are running. One is the access to justice for prisoners, and the other is the Square Circle Clinic. What we have done is we've taken kind of case files from both of them, which will give you testimonies with reference to people incarcerated or under trial, either whose review is pending. And what those of you who are familiar with the Square Circle Clinic's work know that they take on interns. And the job of that intern is largely to write to the family, to ask them to share material which might form the basis of the petition for mitigation. And those of you who heard Professor Anup's presentation says that this is not as easy or as happy or as, unidimensionally good as one would make it, because in many of those cases, families are not very keen to open themselves up to this process because they have very little control, right? And if you're saying that, okay, your mitigation is based on giving me those interesting tidbits of your life that is make it possible for a judge to give you better relief, doesn't seem like much of a choice to them. They don't feel respected. They don't feel that this is any process of participation. They don't see it as, many of them. This is experience, right? We can't judge the experience. We're only putting out that experience. So they don't necessarily always feel involved, or, they don't see it as a dignified process. They don't necessarily see it as emancipatory. They see it as another form of coercion. So those of you who are not And it is a very difficult project. It's not an easy project to read a testimony and try and identify ways in which that particular case can be presented better. There can be a variety of cases. And so that is one choice. I mean, that's an option for us, that we can either break up into groups and each group can be given a testimony. One testimony is a testimony that was filed in the Sukanya Shanta case. So though it is a civil liberties question, there is also the whole business of caste and livelihood that is tied to that. That even within the prison system, the question of certain persons being asked to carry out certain kinds of occupations is where it's not so easy to just make this distinction between political, civil political rights, socio-economic rights. The idea of indivisibility that we were also talking about also makes it not very neat baskets. But of course, if there are other compelling issues that you are motivated by, so we don't want to rule it out for you, that if you want to talk about an issue that you think has motivated you to come here, and going by our presentations in the conference, it could be with reference to manual scavenging, it could be with reference to atrocities, it could be with reference to discrimination, it could be with reference to gender-based discrimination, whatever is an idea that is important to you. And if you want to figure out how does one frame this as a dignity question, and I'm assuming that these questions that are important to you are issues that you see around you. I mean, it's not necessarily a personal experience, but something that you would want to change. And how would you want to change it is also important. I mean, are you also thinking about the ways and means? So, for example, what we saw in the Sukanya Shanta case is a petition filed before the High Court saying that, these are issues which are happening, and hence the courts need to take stock of it and change. So then it is leading into litigation. What we are seeing with the Square Circle Clinic is also leading to litigation, but it is more about gathering information with respect to a person who's been convicted of crime and awaiting sentence. And what kind of factors will be taken into account as we are preparing that brief for the sentence. So that's a clear deliverable. So these are two we have in our mind as an issue as well as a tool or a mechanism to take it forward. The other issues that came up, the other ideas that came up during the conference, for example, was something that Maya Daruwala was talking about, which is to say that why do lawyers really struggle with identifying dignity questions? Is it really as difficult as that? And what are you seeing as the resistance to dignity arguments being made? So, for example, she was chairing the panel of judges and lawyers who were saying that we all know that court procedure is dehumanizing. It's so much of red tape. It's so much of protocol and procedure, and along the way we've totally lost the idea of the individual and the question of dignity, and it's very difficult to change. Okay. So and if those of you who came for the forum theater afterwards know that this is also echoed in the way in which internships function, as to how people are made to feel during an internship, as to how they are treated during an internship, and how that experience can also be quite a challenging experience. But the question for me is, and so as a clinical teacher, my question is, okay, what are you going to do about it? What are the ways in which you can think about pushing for change? So one idea that can be used there is something that came from the conference, which is that supposing and the fact that in all judicial training conferences, there is nothing on dignity ever taught to them. So if we are saying that for the judiciary, if you thought one idea of dignity could be communicated not necessarily as a norm, because they say, yeah, we know all this, but something that connects the norm with something that they see every day in their courts, and we believe that they have the power to change. Something as simple as what Justice Muralidhar was saying, that I always have a chair in the witness box. Even though everybody says, no, 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 I don't think the witnesses are supposed to sit. I don't think the accused should sit. The accused should stand in a particular way in the court. That is dignity. To get him to look down with his hands folded and not say anything is respecting the dignity of the court. Whereas there are others who say, sorry, that doesn't look like a very dignified procedure. The person who is accused of crime should be treated with dignity. That is the dignity of the court. Evidently, two very different ideas of dignity. And how would you want to bring about a change? So we were thinking that this could be in terms of like a small audiovisual film that group of you could try and present to say, okay, this is what procedure looks like, and we can think of procedure that can be different. So these are 3 ideas that we are presenting to you, and we are very happy to hear you about it. You don't have to tell us anything now. You can think about it, and tomorrow morning we're meeting for the tutorial. So then all of you can also tell us if you're comfortable working with groups, you're comfortable working individually, you want to work with what we have suggested, or you have ideas. And please remember, please believe us when we say we are willing to listen to your ideas. We're not prejudging this thing. We just say that we have a plan. If you're not happy with that, we're willing to change it. To say if there's something else that you would like to work on. And make this exercise meaningful to you. Bottom of the, at the end of the day, the idea is to make this experience something that you will remember, and not just as a series of lectures that were given to you and that you can. So this is the plan. If you have any questions.
In the end, the result of the assignment must be that we must be able to give a solution to a problem we
Or
have.
at least a procedure or a pathway as to how it translates into something that can be done on the ground. Something which
So
can
we have to identify the problem accordingly as well, because
it starts with identifying a problem, like what is the idea of dignity. You can take from any of these, or now that, because this is the beginning of the class, now that you had at least 4-5 hours and you've had so much reading, you might want to think differently. So if there is a particular idea of dignity that you think perhaps has not really been, we don't really see it figuring in the law, and you have a given situation that is important to you, and you would want to say, okay, if I had to approach this with dignity, and we'll help you think about it. So the tutorial is also going to be something, after we've heard your ideas, the rest of the sessions will be to provide you with materials that can help you formulate your ideas better. So you can give a basic idea tomorrow on what do you think and how do you want to do this, what are your ideas, right? And then the next sessions, the sessions after that. You want to add?
No.
So we're looking to hear from any questions. So this is required, and please don't look at it as just completion of the course. This is the methodology of the clinic that you are part. It's not just that, okay, if I don't do my assignment, I won't get a certificate. It's not as instrumental as that, but you will appreciate the whole thing better, because we can't teach you all of dignity law. I mean, even if you just look at the list of books Professor Delhi has written, it will take you a lifetime to even wade through it, right? So we can't give you everything about it. But it's possible that if there is a single idea in your mind, we can help you open that up more, so that you will remember that and you will take it with you. And as you read further and move forward, it is something that will stay with you. So any questions that you have? Anything that you haven't understood in the format, or we don't want to give you an exam paper, the multiple choice or otherwise. We don't want you to give in assignments. So we want to, the idea of a clinic is to make it something that is that will be useful as a tool for a lawyer. So the idea is to and the law tools can be, they don't only have to be arguments and a petition and a plea, they can also be educational tools. So we are looking at educational tools. For example, that writing letter to an accused family, to ask them for, all right, how would you want to ask that question? What is it? For example, as you read the case, you'll first have to say, okay, what would be mitigating factors in this case? And how do we ask somebody to open up their lives for us to take what is it that we think is necessary? It's a tool. That letter writing is a 2. Similarly, educational materials on dignity, and if you go to the Dignity Now site, there are small videos which have been put up there on how does one propagate the idea of dignity. Because while everybody knows the word, not everybody possibly understands it very well. So if you wanted to do like a small educational, it could be a poster. It doesn't necessarily have to be a film. I was thinking of a poster actually. That, and I know some of you are very good with that. So then you could identify who in the group has the skills and make it a group project where you make a poster. It could be a particular case. So one of the things I was thinking about is very often, and I remember reading this, and I saw this in one of the newspapers after the Nirbhaya case. If you had to portray the Nirbhaya episode as well as what followed, case was not only about violence. There was also a lot of follow-up about who were these people and how is it that such a crime? Because that's what we're also looking at, right? So when we're saying crime, it's not a unidirectional issue. Crime is also located in society and how people are, you know, all of you know that one of the inmates apparently committed suicide. And you constantly hear this in the conference, as well as anybody who's done work in prison, that somehow rapists and drug peddlers are seen as subhuman, even among convicts. There is a hierarchy within the prison system of who are the persons who are seen as worse than the others. So if you had to, and I saw this really wonderful image of, you know, all the actors in that particular episode. It's not only about the person who was, but there are other actors there that one can take into account. So are you able to visualize idea of dignity associated with, you could say it's criminal justice. The other wonderful idea, if you saw the Dignity Now poster also, and if you have seen any of the dignity campaigns that were run by I think it was the Tata Group on manual scavenging, where they had pictures of people who were actually engaged in manual scavenging, and they were talking about how does one understand dignity there? Why is it important to communicate? How problematic continuing this is. In the conference, we also talk about the fact that all people who have to work in sewers necessarily have to be drunk, otherwise they cannot stand the stench. I think Professor Murli was talking about a case of a manual scavenger who was then accused of abetting the suicide of his wife, who killed herself because she couldn't bear the stench. So, have you contributed to creating that situation in your family as well? So I understand that these 3 baskets are important, that we need to distinguish the wheel of dignity rights and the variety of dignity rights, but also not lose sight of the fact that they're very connected. So the plea for death sentence for all those people involved in the Nirbhaya case very clearly was pointed out as a class and caste thing, because you don't see the same plea for atrocities cases. In fact, most of the SC/ST atrocity cases never have a death penalty. Maximum you will get is a life term or even less. Never gone all the way to a death penalty. So there are dimensions which are related. So the liberty, the freedom, the criminal justice, and the socioeconomic conditions of people are interrelated. So if you're able to create, depending on how you want to do it. So I can think of these 4 things, and I'm sure that all of you can think about this. Right? And we would want to hear about this tomorrow morning. That's the task for the 11 to 1. Those of you who know the basement outside the old counseling room, the new counseling room in the medical center, can you help everybody else reach there? Can show it out to them. That we will meet there tomorrow at 11. From 11 to 1, we will hear your ideas. We already went to make sure that there are chairs there. There are no fans. We'll try to get the fans, but otherwise, let's just meet so that we can also break up into groups if we need to. And if you need to talk to each other to create some ideas you want to discuss with yourself, then that possibility is there. So, are there any questions you would like to know, to think about on this?
If I can just reiterate one point, which is just that it really is sort of an opportunity for you to, in the limited time we have, but still for you to just sort of dive deep into some issue that's of particular interest to you and really think in a very practical, sort of lawyerly way, not an abstract academic way, but in a real practical lawyerly way about how can we fix this problem and how does the lens of dignity help us think through it.
And there can be so many ideas because some of you, I don't know how, if any of you were involved in the law and language clinic that was conducted last semester, where they went to the courts and they were looking at the language of the court and how difficult it is for people to find their way. I mean, it's not even the outcome of the case, it is not procedure, it is not the tarik pe tarik, just the labyrinth of the courtroom and the court system. Somebody who's unfamiliar with the language, who doesn't have a lawyer to guide them through, more than a lawyer who doesn't have they call law clerks, right? The munshis, who really know the lay of the land, so to say. I think all lawyers are completely lost and they're more than happy to give it to the munshi and say, you please do this filing for me, or you please do this for me, you get me this document. I cannot find my way through that. So just as anybody who's been to a courtroom or anybody who has experienced how alienating the court system is, if you want to talk about, what are the ways in which one can. So one of the things that came up in the conference, that business of there are no rules or there are no guidelines given to a magistrate on how to conduct the court. Now, I said, good, no, you don't have guidelines, you make your own. For me, it looked like an opportunity to do whatever I wanted to do, that my courtroom was my space. I'll do whatever because you haven't told me what not to do. It's best to operate like that. But others said, no, we need a SOP. About where the lawyer sits, about where the judge sits, where the witnesses sit. And taking off from how Justice Muralidhar was saying that the POA Act is a legislative recognition of dignity, possibly having a system, and I think that's something that you have also worked on, right? We want to talk about it a little, on how we can make sure that all courtrooms are obliged to follow a minimum set of protocols to make the proceeding dignified. Like, we know the whole business of handcuffing, we know the business of not allowing the accused to speak or to have I don't know. I mean, even I think if you go to courts, they say you can't sit in front of the judge with your legs crossed. So, in terms of what is it that judges can't impose upon you? They can't tell you can't cross your legs. They can't tell you that, you can't address the court at all under any circumstances. So if we are saying that, okay, and that could be, I'm saying that could be a class project. Doesn't need to be an individual project. That can be a class project. Supposing, and Procedere will talk more about it. If all of us had to say and write a letter to the High Court saying that, can the High Court put out like a SOP on how judges need to conduct their, how they should make sure that the persons before them are respected, feel heard. There was one very, very interesting presentation that came in the conference. She was a lawyer who was saying that, there is a study in Singapore, she was referring to some study, where they talked about how the judge behaves. A smirk or raising an eyebrow. It could just be a non-verbal signal. It doesn't even have to be something that they actually done. I mean, it would be wonderful. I mean, I don't know how many of you have seen this series of very small posters on sexual harassment, which said that when somebody is behaving in a manner that's harassing, can you just show him the mirror? It's him, of course, naturally. Show him the mirror. Do you know what you look like when you're staring at me? It was mind blowing for me. Do you know what it looks like to you? So how will it be if we tell judges that this is how you look? You might not intend to be. And I think in many ways I'm equally guilty. And so I'm very happy if somebody comes up and tells me that you might think you're being very approachable, but you're not. But I think it's very important to tell people in positions of power and authority that it doesn't matter what you're thinking or what your intentions are. If you're unable to conduct yourself in a manner that the other persons don't see as dignified, then it is important for you to acknowledge them. Start with at least acknowledging, especially about people in, and judges are people in power. So I found that amazing because all of you, I mean, can you open up on this? Have you never experienced walking into somebody's room and the person hasn't said much, but just the way they looked? And I'm happy to share the fact I walked into a room, I spoke, and I walked out, and the person sighed. Didn't do anything. Just said this. I said, what do you mean? What does it mean? Yeah? May not mean anything. But it's an experience. Yeah? That it could be a very small thing. It doesn't need to be very big. But it doesn't make the other person feel disrespected. Does it make the other person feel put the other person in dignity? And this is usually about people in power. Let's make it very clear. We are talking about people in positions of power who would need to be constantly reminded personally that there is this way in which everything that you're saying and doing would make the process itself meaningless. Because if the impression that the person gets is that they're not listening to them because of the way in which you are behaving, then the person loses belief in the process. This is not working. Right? And if this could happen in courts, and can we start this conversation on procedures for courts? Or how does one sensitize judges to the kind of impression that they may be making on people who are in their courts? Like my impression of courts, especially trial courts, is that there's a judge sitting there, and then there's that munshi on the court clerk. There are two lawyers standing there who are controlling the entire procedure. Nobody else in the court knows what's happening. Half the time the judge is not saying anything. It's the court clerk who's reading out dates and whatever. And the persons who's very close friends with the court clerk know exactly what's happening. Everybody else is at sea on a proceeding in an open court. Right? So can we talk about, I don't know how many of you are familiar with court proceedings? Is that something you want to do?
While I completely am empathetic with the idea here, but just one thing that in terms of our specific case, which is India, any such implementations would have to take into account that there's a lot of caseload. So all these measures would have to understand that even if 5 minutes more are spent, one person is, ma'am, so I think, is their opinion there as well?
Yeah, I think as we talk about it, about saying, okay, what is it that we would like to do? This would be a conversation that we will have, right? That our judges are overburdened and they are doing job under great difficulty. But is it still, so the question of dignity is it's non-derogable, right? It's not negotiable. So first we need to identify what would be practices which make a person in a court feel disrespected, feel not heard, lose belief in the process. So if petitioners say that, okay, I don't believe that anything is going to happen, then that's a problem with not just a judge. That is a problem with our justice system itself. So if we want to start that discussion, if that's something all of you are interested in. So these are the 5-6 options that we were thinking about that you could possibly do as a group, as an entire class or individuals, and we'd like to hear from. Any other questions?
Idea, but obviously the justice system is a lot bigger in terms of any systematic change that would have to be brought about. But maybe we could start a little small. because the same sort of delays that we attribute to the system outside within the courts can also be found within our administration. So of course, like it's more like we could also draw parallels and see how that works out, because that's something that at least if we're working on a timeline, it might be something that we can actually maybe like.
So the idea is, if everybody is on board, that is what everybody wants to do, or is that something you want to do? That's up to you. Then you can decide about it. As to, we were looking at it as in terms of you being lawyers and perhaps being able to talk about something which has some meaning for a larger section of the population, not your own immediate needs, but we're perfectly fine to saying that that's what you want to do. Be okay with it. We can think about it. I mean, I'm perfectly open to saying that that's what you want to do, that you can do it. But then if you want it as a group project, then there has to have to be others who are involved.
One clarification of what is the strength of groups that will
I'm not looking at anything.
anything goes.
Anything. We'll hear you tomorrow and we can take a call tomorrow. We're not, I'm just opening up the floor for all of you to think about it. So anything else that you have in mind? Any other questions? So what we've also put out here is to say that perhaps socioeconomic ties haven't figured in a major way. So maybe we can get back to that idea.